Random House Audio presents A Feast for Crows, Book 4 of A Song of Ice and Fire, by George R. Martin, read for you by Roy Dotrice. Prologue. "Dragons," said Melander. He snatched a withered apple off the ground and tossed it hand to hand. "Throw the apple," urged Alaris the Sphinx. He slipped an arrow from his quiver and knocked it to his bowstring. "I should like to see a dragon." Rune was the youngest of them, a chunky boy still 2 years shy of manhood. "I should like that very much." "And I should like to sleep with Rosie's arms around me," Pate thought. He shifted restlessly on the bench. By the morrow the girl could well be his. "I will take her far from Old Town, across the narrow sea to one of the free cities." There were no maesters there, no one to accuse him. He could hear Emma's laughter coming through a shuttered window overhead, mingled with the deeper voice of the man she was entertaining. She was the oldest of the serving wenches at the Quill and Tankard, 40 if she was a day, but still pretty in a fleshy sort of way. Rosie was her daughter, 15 and freshly flowered. Emma had decreed that Rosie's maidenhead would cost a golden dragon. Pate had saved 9 silver stags and a pot of copper, stars and pennies for all the good that would do him. He would have stood a better chance of hatching a real dragon than saving up enough coin to make a golden one. "You were born too late for dragons, lad," Armand the acolyte told Rune. Armand wore a leather thong about his neck, strung with links of pewter, tin, lead, and copper, and like most acolytes he seemed to believe that novices had turnips growing from their shoulders in place of heads. "The last one perished during the reign of King Aegon III. "The last dragon in Westeros," insisted Melander. "Throw the apple," Alaris urged again. He was a comely youth, their Sphinx. All serving wenches doted on him. Even Rosie would sometimes touch him on the arm when she brought him wine, and Pate had to gnash his teeth and pretend not to see. "The last dragon in Westeros was the last dragon," said Armand doggedly. "That is well known." "The apple," Alaris said, "unless you mean to eat it." "Here!" Dragging his club foot, Melander took a short hop, whirled, and whipped the apple side-arm into the mist that hung above the honey wine. If not for his foot, he would have been a knight like his father. He had the strength for it, in those thick arms and broad shoulders. Far and fast the apple flew, but not as fast as the arrow that whistled after it, a yard-long shaft of golden wood fletched with scarlet feathers. Pate did not see the arrow catch the apple, but he heard it. A soft chunk echoed back across the river, followed by a splash. Melander whistled. "You caught it, sweet." "Not half as sweet as Rosie." Pate loved her hazel eyes and budding breasts and the way she smiled every time she saw him. He loved the dimples in her cheeks. Sometimes she went barefoot as she served, to feel the grass beneath her feet. He loved that too. He loved the clean, fresh smell of her, the way her hair curled behind her ears. He even loved her toes. One night she let him rub her feet and play with them, and he made up a funny tale for every toe to keep her giggling. Perhaps he would do better to remain on this side of the narrow sea. He could buy a donkey with the coin he'd saved, and he and Rosie could take turns riding it as they wandered Westeros. Ebros might not think him worthy of the silver, but Pate knew how to set a bone and leech a fever. The small folk would be grateful for his help. If he could learn to cut hair and shave beards, he might even be a barber. "That would be enough," he told himself, "so long as I had Rosie." Rosie was all that he wanted in the world. That had not always been so. Once he had dreamed of being a maester in a castle, in a service to some open-handed lord who would honour him for his wisdom and bestow a fine white horse on him to thank him for his service. How high he'd ride, how nobly, smiling down at the small folk when he passed them on the road. One night, in the Quill and Tankard's common room, after his second tankard of fearsomely strong cider. Pate had boasted that he would not always be a novice. "True," lazy Leo had called out. "You'll be a former novice, herding swine." He drained the dregs of his tankard. The torchlit terrace of the Quill and Tankard was an island of light in a sea of mist this morning. Downriver, the distant beacon of the high tower floated in a damp of night like a hazy orange moon, but the light did little to lift his spirits. The alchemist should have come by now. Had it all been some cruel jape, or had something happened to the man? It would not have been the first time that good fortune had turned sour on Pate. He had once counted himself lucky to be chosen to help old Archmaester Walgrave with the ravens, never dreaming that before long he would also be fetching the man's meals, sweeping out his chambers, and dressing him every morning. Everyone said that Walgrave had forgotten more of Ravenscraft than most maesters ever knew, so Pate assumed a black iron link was the least that he could hope for, only to find that Walgrave could not grant him one. The old man remained an archmaester only by courtesy. As great a maester as once he'd been, now his robes concealed soiled small clothes, oft as not, and half a year ago some acolytes found him weeping in the library, unable to find his way back to his chambers. Maester Gorman sat below the iron mask in Walgrave's place, the same Gorman who had once accused Pate of theft. In the apple tree beside the water, a nightingale began to sing. It was a sweet sound, a welcome respite from the harsh screams and endless quawkings of the ravens he had tended all day long. The white ravens knew his name, and would mutter it to each other whenever they caught sight of him. "Pate! Pate! Pate!" until he wanted to scream. The big white birds were Archmaester Walgrave's pride. He wanted them to eat him when he died, but Pate half suspected they meant to eat him too. Perhaps it was the fearsomely strong cider. He had not come here to drink, but Alaris had been buying to celebrate his copper link, and guilt had made him thirsty. But it almost sounded as if the nightingale were trilling, "Gold for iron! Gold for iron! Gold for iron!" which was passing strange, because that was what the stranger had said the night Rosie brought the two of them together. "Who are you?" Pate had demanded of him, and the man had replied, "An alchemist. I can change iron into gold." And then the coin was in his hand, dancing across his knuckles, the soft yellow gold shining in the candlelight. On one side was a three-headed dragon, on the other the head of some dead king. "Gold for iron," Pate remembered. "You won't do better. Do you want her? Do you love her?" "I'm no thief," he told the man who had called himself the alchemist. "I am a novice of the citadel." The alchemist had bowed his head and said, "If you should reconsider, I shall return here 3 days hence with my dragon." 3 days had passed. Pate had returned to the Quill and Tankard, still uncertain what he was, but instead of the alchemist he found Melander and Armon and the Sphinx, with Rune in tow. It would have raised suspicions not to join them. The Quill and Tankard never closed. For 600 years it had been standing on its island in the honey wine, and never once had its doors been shut to trade. Though the tall timber building leaned toward the south, the way novices sometimes leaned after a tankard, Pate expected that the inn would go on standing for another 600 years, selling wine and ale and fearsomely strong cider to rivermen and seamen, smiths and singers, priests and princes, and the novices and acolytes of the citadel. "Old Town is not the world," declared Melander too loudly. He was a knight's son, and drunk as drunk could be. Since they brought him word of his father's death upon the Blackwater, he got drunk most every night. Even in Old Town, far from the fighting and safe behind its walls, the War of the Five Kings had touched them all. Although Archmaster Benedict insisted that there had never been a War of 5 Kings, since Renly Baratheon had been slain before Balon Greyjoy had...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?